Recently, Dan Aykroyd shared some pretty insightful thoughts about where the Ghostbusters franchise should be heading, especially with talk swirling around the idea of a sixth movie. Akroyd, who's a comedy legend with a career stretching back to 1974, will forever be tied to Ghostbusters, thanks to how massive that original 1984 film became. But even he seems to recognize that times have changed, and it might finally be the moment for Ghostbusters to truly step forward without leaning so heavily on the original crew. Now, this isn't exactly a new challenge for the franchise. Ever since 2016, every Ghostbusters movie has managed to work in the original team in some way. In that 2016 reboot, it was admittedly a little awkward, with the classic actors popping up as completely different characters, and there was no direct link to their past adventures. Things smoothed out a bit in Ghostbusters Afterlife and then Frozen Empire, where the original actors returned as their beloved characters, only now in more supportive roles. Even so, Akroyd recently pointed out that it's probably time for Ghostbusters to start charting a new course that doesn't rely on the old team, especially after Frozen Empire didn't quite set the box office on fire. And really, he makes a good point. There's only so far nostalgia can take a movie. When you bring back these iconic characters, it's undeniably exciting, but after that first rush, the novelty fades, and the story needs to stand on its own. The numbers show this pretty clearly. Even though the 2016 movie had its share of controversy and backlash before it ever hit theaters, it still managed to pull in about $25 million more than either of the newer sequels. That suggests that simply reuniting familiar faces isn't enough to keep the momentum going forever. Akroyd himself put it best when he said, "I don't see that coming. I don't see where they would need us to carry it on. They've got a whole new cast, and they've got whole new ideas. I think probably they're going to move on to advancing it beyond the originals, which they should." That's actually a really healthy perspective, because it's clear he wants to see the franchise thrive long into the future, even if it's no longer centered on the team that first captured everyone's imagination. Although Ghostbusters Afterlife did a clever job connecting the original story to the new generation, Frozen Empire leaned a bit more on familiar ground. That meant Paul Rudd and the newer characters didn't quite get the full chance to take the spotlight for themselves. But all of this just sets the stage for Ghostbusters 6 to really push things forward. It's actually a super exciting opportunity. The groundwork has already been laid for a new crew to pick up the proton packs and carry the story into fresh territory. Sure, it's true that previous attempts to pass the torch didn't totally take off right away. The 2016 reboot tried to reinvent the team with an all-female cast, which in itself wasn't a bad idea at all. The cast had great comedic chops, and the setup had potential, but with all the outside noise and controversy, the film never quite found its footing. When they switched things up again with Afterlife, it felt like a soft handover, blending old and new by following Egon Spengler's daughter and grandkids as they stumbled into ghostbusting. That movie did a fantastic job of bridging the gap between generations, even though it didn't completely let go of the original lineup. So by the time Frozen Empire rolled around, the classic team was actually featured even more heavily. That left newer faces like Paul Rudd's Gary and the kids still sharing the stage instead of fully owning it. But this isn't necessarily a problem, it just means the next movie is perfectly positioned to give them center stage. The torch is basically already in their hands. Now they just need to run with it. That's why it's pretty great news that Ghostbusters 6 still seems very much alive. Despite Frozen Empire's box office being a little underwhelming compared to some expectations, Ghostbusters is still one of the most loved franchises out there. There's just so much more story left to tell. They've barely scratched the surface after 5 films. With this new team, featuring Carrie Coon, Paul Rudd, Mckenna Grace, and Finn Wolfhard, the movies could easily venture into totally fresh directions. Imagine Phoebe and Trevor heading off to college and finding their dorms haunted, or the Ghostbusters going nationwide as the demand for their services grows. Maybe they're flying out to different states, tracking down supernatural mysteries all over the U.S. It'd be a blast seeing these characters step into the spotlight without having to constantly tie things back to what happened in the 80s. Even Gil Kenan, the director of Frozen Empire, sounds enthusiastic about the future. In a recent chat, he didn't spill all the secrets, but he made it clear that he and Jason Reitman, whose dad Ivan gave us the original classic, are already talking about more films. He said, "We definitely are continuing the conversation of telling big Ghostbuster stories on the big screen. There'll be more about that later." So, it's obvious that they're not ready to pack up the Ecto-1 just yet. As for what Frozen Empire's performance means moving forward, it might actually open up some cool creative doors. Because the movie didn't soar quite as high financially, it made about $201 million worldwide on a $100 million budget, the studio might look to scale things down a bit. That could translate into more contained, character-focused stories rather than big spectacle. And honestly, that's not such a bad idea. Sometimes smaller budgets force storytellers to get clever, leading to richer plots and deeper character arcs. If they can trim back on costs, maybe by having a tighter cast or fewer CGI-heavy scenes, they could tell a more intimate ghost story that still feels true to the Ghostbusters spirit. It also means they wouldn't necessarily need to keep roping in the original stars, who probably come with pretty hefty paychecks by now. And that's not to say anyone wouldn't love seeing Bill Murray or Akroyd pop up again, but letting the new team shine solo for a bit could give audiences a chance to fall in love with them the same way they did with the originals decades ago. Looking at it all together, it really feels like the perfect time to give the newer characters a fresh chapter. People absolutely adored seeing legacy icons like Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, and Winston Zeddemore again, but the real longevity of Ghostbusters depends on crafting adventures that don't rely solely on callbacks. With characters like Gary, Callie, Trevor, and Phoebe already introduced and well-liked, the next movie has everything it needs to build a solid foundation for the franchise's next era. It's kind of exciting that Kenan hinted there are plenty more Ghostbusters on the horizon. Even though Frozen Empire leaned a lot on nostalgia, future films have the chance to pivot, telling brand new stories that push this universe into directions we haven't seen before. Now, it just needs to take that next bold step forward and let the new crew own it completely. And honestly, that's something to look forward to. And that's that for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.